Hello, everybody. Welcome to the, I was just called Afrofuturism?
Yes.
All right. Welcome to Afrofuturism.
You know, I have just so free range for us. That's giving us too much leeway right there.
That is a huge umbrella.
Right.
So I'm gonna hit the card and then we'll jump into it. Do a little moderate. Hi, I'm Cisco. I'll be your moderator for the afternoon, at least for this hour. Afrofuturism centers on Black history and culture, incorporating science fiction, technology, and futuristic elements into literature, music, and the visual arts. Recurring themes include reclamation, Black liberation, revisioning the past, and predicting the future. Oh, those are just keywords. So before we get started, I'm gonna let my distinguished panel on the dais introduce themselves, so let us know who you are, what you do, and give us 2 examples of an Afrofuturistic piece. Could be comics, television shows, books, films, etc. One from this year or recent, and then one that's just dear to your heart from any era.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Miss Shannan Paul. I hub here in the Twin Cities. I'm a radio and TV person and comedian who's very happy to join you. I also spend a lot of time working in the spaces of inclusivity for all of us, so thank you very much for having me. As far as Afrofuturism, I love that we have this terminology for it now, because it's another one of those things that existed before we had a name for it. And now we have an appropriately searchable thing that algorithms can then find if you want to do it. So back to your suggestions. From the musical perspective, who I've been listening to a lot lately is Robert Glasper. He's an American jazz musician who has a variety of things, and especially if you look through his Black radio albums, we're up to like 3. And I love all of the music that he does, but I think that he's one of my most recent musicians that does, who I would say would be part of the space. And then if we're going back, I'm glad you asked me that, Trey. I recently I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Washington, D.C., so I of course stopped by the Smithsonian and the National African American History Museum and the Smithsonian there, which is a very impactful opportunity if you ever get the chance to go. Give yourself some time to really explore it. And so again, just because a lot of it is, I know we'll cover a variety of media that is part of the Afrofuturism diaspora, but for me it was also looking back at music again, because that's been the theme of a lot of what I'm personally going through right now. So to be able to look back and see the music of Prince in the museum, to be able to see the music of Parliament and all of this funk that goes back to the 60s and 70s was very impactful for me. So I would encourage you to look back into that as well.
Well, hello. My name is Lathan. I am a giant nerd in science and history, culture, and like Afrofuturism is something that I'm very, very excited about. So as a concept, I've been doing a lot of, particularly reading, a lot of Tomi Ademi and Nnedi Okorafor actually, and that's for recent, I think Afrofuturism, one of my favorites has been the Binti series by Nnedi Okorafor, which is just, I feel captures such a wonderful space odyssey sci-fi epic from a very African perspective that is just really, really fun and really, really, really interesting to enjoy. Actually, bringing up music, I feel like music-wise, I've been really vibing on K-Tronada and just the use of instrumentality, of just creating a lot of very specific kind of like environmental feels. Like it's something that literally feels very almost playful and tropical and electronic and futuristic, and I really just kind of love that entire vibe. And probably just something that's a little more classic, but I feel like very relevant, that's always going to be for me, is the original Blade movies.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that's me. And we'll hear more about that stuff as we get going, because I'm going to be bouncing on all kinds of stuff as we get to it.
No, I love it, and I love that you brought up the AFAM Museum, because I can never remember the Smithsonian, because it's really long, the National Museum of African American History. So I just call it AFAM Museum in there. So like my 2 just are let in there really quickly. Recent thing is But I'm a Virgo, which was an Amazon streaming series by Boots Riley, who was the filmmaker who did Sorry to Bother You. It is phenomenal. It's, I want to say 2 years old, but it's still on Amazon. It's a great series. And then classic, and this is how I'm going to tie it back together, one of my favorite pieces of all time is a story by W.E.B. Du Bois called The Comet, which came out, I want to say 31, maybe 32, like 1931 or 32. And it is one of the first examples of just dystopian science fiction. It's a fantastic piece. If you haven't read it, it's free online. It's only about 3,000 words, so it's a quick read, but basically there's a comet that hits New York City. Everyone is gone except for one black man and one white woman who are now trying to deal with issues of racial dynamics in the 30s in this dystopian setting, and I think it still holds up. It's fantastic. And you brought up this great point about like it's something that we've always had but just recently got a name for. And so what happens sometimes with this sort of revision or looking back to name something or categorize something is then those definitions can be a little fluid, a little wonky, they're not as concrete. So what in your minds classifies as like Afrofuturism versus like just sci-fi with black people in it?
Oh, excellent question. I guess if I was going to make a column, because it is, you want to be like something but different, because that's the way that all of our algorithms work right now. So if I was going to make a column, it's something that is able to talk about the history of our people and acknowledge all of that, but still look at it from a position of how can you thrive in the future. And so I think it's that combination of being able to do both is where I think the Afrofuturism, for me, part of that definition happens. Because there are lots of things that might be really great products that feature those that, you know, whether you're still using BIPOC or people of the global majority or all of those things, I think that that is still a great piece of work as far as representation goes, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to the Afrofuturism genre in my definition. If that, did I answer your question, Taylor? Okay.
I'd say it's a little bit, for me it's fairly complicated, but I feel that, I guess, classical science fiction has very distinct cultural markers that it draws from Western philosophy and concepts. It has distinct qualities of centering on like a particular individual as a protagonist. It has very distinct qualities of often separating magic from science in a certain way. It has a certain way of looking at looking at gender, looking at society, and looking at looking at nature in a particular way that is very much based off of European history and traditions and whatnot. And where Afrofuturism really draws from very different cultural perspectives. I find some of the themes that I see are a lot more often of a collective or collaborational interaction, where there might be a main character, but they're not necessarily really the main character. There's often a much more of a blending of how the supernatural or the spiritual and science are really interpreted. I feel like Benty, that I mentioned earlier, does a really good job, I think, of kind of talking about how like crafting and engineering is done from both there's a science to it, but it's also a very spiritual process. It's almost its own form of magic, but it's still understood as not really any different than any other scientific practice. And then also things that really do kind of center aspects of Black culture or Black language and interaction. You can take a Black character and put them in like a traditional sci-fi setting, but they're pretty much just filling out the same cultural role. And then there are some gray areas where you have Black characters introduced to a traditional sci-fi world, and they bring elements of Black culture and Black traditions kind of into it, and then you kind of get this bit of a melody quality to it. But those very distinct differences, you can see a different cultural perspective. I would even say that even with traditional science fiction, even when traditional science fiction challenges certain cultural narratives, is different than in like Afrofuturism, where the narratives were different from the start. Like there's like lots of science fiction will be like, is the boundary between nature and technology really so different? And Afrofuturism was like, no. Like, was that even a question?
Right.
Can we move on to something more pressing here? Or okay, sure, I guess. Good job, cool, glad you figured that out. So those different cultural distinctions in the story and the medium.
And I think the three of us were on the Blaxploitation panel as well, right? And I think that a good example, I had to look it up to make sure, because I just watched it and I needed to make sure that I was doing it right. But recently they dropped, they cloned Tyrone, which I think is and that just dropped. And so if you have seen it, I think that's a good example of Afrofuturism meets modern day blaxploitation in a good way. Like, I thought that the performances were great. You can check it out. It's a Netflix show, and it's fabulous in that it does really focus on a lot of what would be in this black culture, but it also throws in that science and the this, and it is, and it made me think of what, I thought of because of what you were saying, Lathan. It really does talk about, but it's still a matter of a cultural perspective and what's going on with these things, and there's still all this stuff is going on in their hood and all these things. But then there's this science, weird, creepy overlay that it's, the conversation is different in the way that you said.
I love that what you mentioned about when they sometimes will bring in a character, and that character, something because they're written really well, or they're just a major part of it, whether it's like Michonne on The Walking Dead, or Captain Burnham leading the entirety of the Discovery series, for better or worse. When that happens, is there a distinction in the voicing? So like, also to your point about how sci-fi challenges narratives, or traditional sci-fi challenges narratives, whereas Afrofuturism is already starting from a differentiating point to begin with. Like, when we introduce the Afrofuturistic element into traditional sci-fi, like, does that always, I don't want to say yield benefit, but is it always a good thing, or does it feel like that line between tokenization and representation is so fine to begin with? Like, are there some examples you could cite of like, oh, this was done really well, and this maybe not so much?
Well, that's why I brought up they clone Tyrell, and I think that was done well, but there are situations where it gets so watered down that I don't think it really achieves the purpose that they said. And so it seems like representation for the sake of representation, and I am not a fan of that because I feel like it causes more backlash than it just making a quality film that, because we need to have enough of that created that when one falls a little flat, they don't go see, oh, it sucked and nobody wants to go. Which some people are already hoping that that is the case because they are so challenged by the creation of this new media, or the, not even the creation, because as you said, a lot of it had been created anyway, by the success of this additional narrative, that they're frustrated by this fact that it's going well and now there's other storylines, even though they can continue to watch whatever it is they were watching. We're just saying there's addition that's out there. So, an example of what went poorly,
Well, that was a great, I mean, that was a great through line. Sorry, we all know each other. So
yeah, we're all here.
But like, that's a great through line because there's so many, so how much of it is the content of the media and so much more the promotion? So for example, you mentioned Blade, the Blade trilogy, that was not marketed as Afrofuturistic. It wasn't even marketed as a quote-unquote black superhero. It was just like, yo, you want to see this badass vampire killing other vampires? And we all said yes. And then you fast forward, was it 25, 30 years later, and they're like, here's Black Panther, and then the backlash, like obviously decent people were like, this sounds cool. Then there were those less than decent people. I mean, sorry, taste is subjective, but if you didn't like Black Panther, you suck.
He's so honest and
forthright. So how much of that was like, is it because this new terminology and because we have words on it and we're a lot less, we're a lot more unapologetic in pushing it? Is that
I think
what
we're more unapologetic in pushing it. Yeah.
I do, and I also think, yeah, I think it is a bit of a language thing. It's also, I think it's also very telling, because you bring that up as like, nobody, like Blade was never marketed as an Afrofuturistic or even like a black movie. It was like, it's a futuristic vampire hunting movie. It just so happens that the main character is like both very visibly black, but also in the culture representation. So some neat background about Blade movies is like Wesley Snipes grew up in New York, grew up around a lot of traditional African-American fighting styles, including 52 blocks. He was one of the first people to study capoeira under Jean Vallon, who came in 1975. And a lot of some of the other elements in Blade also are a bit of indicative of Afro-Caribbean culture. There's a scene where he's going in to get materials for more serum. And he's going into a botanica, which are places in, like, particularly in the Bronx, that people go for supplies for voodoo or Santeria or other Afro-based religious practices. And kind of built into it is like Blade's whole vampire hunting methodology is very much based around African and Afro-diasporic martial and spiritual warrior type practices, of the way that he moves, the way that he kind of, the strategy behind it, the kind of the blending of being able to fight physical but also spiritual threats, as vampires kind of being supernatural, is kind of all built into it.
Right.
But nobody ever really notices that. It just looks really cool as he like literally punches a vampire until it disintegrates. Like I watch that scene and it's like, you can only kill vampires with silver or garlic or sunlight, or you could just punch them so freaking hard. He just like, nope, he just ashed. He just hit really, like, nope, I'm done. I am done with this life. Blade punched me really hard, I quit.
I call it a day, yeah. But it's also interesting the way you brought that up, and I think that's a combination. As someone who grew up in a Baptist Black church, so hearing like so many of these things, it also was, well, it was organically, like I call her my voodoo grandma. Like we had this conflicts of religion and these other things that I think happened a lot, especially if you grew up in the South. It wasn't as much once you get up here to the North, but it's okay to mention that in a non-threatening way. When I'm also a lady of a certain age, and I can literally remember once we moved to a different church, everything that was seen as that conflux or any of those things that overlaid, it was not only racially inappropriate, but it was literally called and deemed satanic. And so it was like, so you can't like it anyway, because now this movie gets piled because we're talking about something that's not that typical Christian lens, which is a lot of our media still here in America, kind of thing. And again, I grew up in a Christian church. I'm not bounding on that, and we all have our choices. But since it wasn't in that lens, there was another reason to sit there and go, this gets in a banned list, this is inappropriate. When it was a superhero movie, but it wasn't a superhero that got powers because he was a white dude that just had just the right sunlight, and that's super dope. He got it because of this conflux of, what they would say, mystical practices. So now it's not only a problem and it's satanic and it's ruining our children. So that was, I think, a lot of this media was also squashed because it doesn't fit that narrative, when a lot of the Afrofuturistic narrative does have, as Lathan said, all of those things layered like a lovely cake, kind of thing, or a bar if you're from here. So there were layers in it, and people just couldn't take it. And because there was a layer that they're like, no, but I find that layer so distasteful because it rails against a particular historic construct that I just can't let go.
Another good example, and then I'll jump into a bad example of just like the Blackness in Africa is kind of being incorporated into a more traditional story, I think, was the remake of the Witches movie that came out recently. Because the grandma in that movie practices hoodoo, and they actually even bring it up as like she is very Christian, like she still believes and specifically hunts witches, but also utilizes an African-based interpretation of Christian practice that involves knowing how to use herbs, how to do magic, and how to seek out specifically witches that are seen as the ones that want to go and actually do harm. And I also like how they also use kind of like, because traditionally the concept of a witch in most original languages wasn't someone who did magic, it was like an asshole who did magic. The same way just like if you are a blacksmith who goes around and throws horseshoes at people, you would go to jail for assault. And specifically in cultures where there was a pre-belief in the practice of magic, if you were using magic for negative things, that was its own specific kind of crime. That's really where that particular word in a lot of cultures kind of comes from.
And a lot of times it would be also used, if you brought it out, it was healer or and teacher or a lot of other things as well. Or the Marabouts throughout North Africa, and where they were they know how to use spiritual powers to heal things. And usually, if you were dealing with someone who's a bad practitioner, you would bring in someone who would do good magics, and that even shows up even in medieval Christian practices of how to deal with malevolent magic and whatnot. And I did like how they incorporated that element of she's a hoodoo practitioner who is helping her grandson fight these witches that are trying to destroy all the children in the world. That was a really good example. I cannot honestly say that this is definitely a bad example, but just from the trailer and the description, the Society of American. The Magical Negroes?
Yeah, that was whereas I watched the first 20 seconds and I'm this could be good. Wait, no. Why does this just look and feel like Hogwarts with more black people? Why is this whole thing has to get with the, but if you're supposed to be preventing white people being mad from there's a lot of,
It was I watched most of it because I wanted to like it, because I laughed at the 2 jokes that are funny in the trailer. If you guys are familiar, do you guys know the movie that we're talking about that just dropped? It's, because especially since it's a comedy, I get what they were saying, and it has some really good black actors that were in it, and I'm very disappointed that it was so cringe. But I think it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning of a description of, well, does it put it through a different lens? And that's why we're making this film, which the Jeffrey, the one where he wrote the book, but he wrote it extra, that one, that I think is a good, I watched that one as well. That was a good example of trying to dismantle tropes and do those things versus the Society of Magical Negroes. It's a joke that we've all talked about magical Negroes, but if you don't understand what magical Negro trope is, it's one of those things that nobody really can, it doesn't really land the irony that it's trying to play. It just turns into this really sappy love story between this dude, and it's such a typical love story. It's just a movie just being a movie. So it's adding the layer of race involved in it, I think makes it worse. Because it's really just a corny rom-com.
Well, it undermined its own premise. Because the premise of the film is a secret society of magic Negroes who try to make white people feel comfortable. And then you take a step back, the movie itself was doing just that. It had the opportunity to say something and really present something, but instead it was well, we don't want to make the white people in the audience uncomfortable. And that's kind of what undermined it. And I know we had a question on the side.
I was just asking what the name of the good one was.
American Fiction.
Oh yes, thank you, yes.
Yes.
And then our friend is my redheaded friend as well.
Earlier you were talking about They Clone Tyrone. In case someone missed this, it's playing at 11:30 Saturday night at Cinema Rock.
Oh, fabulous! I didn't see that. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it is very worth, in my opinion, worth a watch. I enjoyed it. It's I also the few trigger warnings I give it is appropriately violent. Where you're just oh wait, that guy got shot. A lot. But I do think that it did a good job what I felt like when I was watching. Am I the only one on the panel that's seen that from it? Yeah. The thing that I did is I like it when it it acknowledges disparities in some black communities, and then how people are navigating that, but then adds in all of the layers of why do you choose to stay within it? Why do you choose to try and work within this narrative? Why do you try to get out of this narrative? And I think that that's what a lot of stories about that don't do. And when we were discussing this from a perspective of blaxploitation, some people don't want to showcase that at all. And I'm one of those people well, let's show it in a variety of different ways instead of going, well, not everybody's like that. Well, hopefully, I think this film does, this movie does a good job of going, yeah, we know not everybody has that particular existence, but these people do.
Right, and it's the multifaceted aspect of, because Afrofuturism is such a huge umbrella term. It's really not a genre, it's just kind of a classification. Like you said, romance, or fiction.
Yes.
There's so much that fits under that, and to that point too, The Clone Tyrone is a fantastic film, and in the same vein, the series I mentioned earlier, But I'm a Virgo, which is a series, but it does the thing with Black Panther or even Star Trek, it's always, here's our best and brightest. This is the cream of the crop, these are the ones who are quote unquote, the safe ones. Because no matter what, if you met, Shuri, you're gonna be impressed regardless of her SPF requirements. You're this is a brilliant woman. But what about those of us who don't have that much education? And But I'm a Virgo is basically about these, I don't want to spoil too much. It takes place in California, alternate universe, where a disparaged community economically, the hood, quote unquote,
Yes.
and then one young man ends up growing to be about 13 feet tall. And that's all, literally that's all I can say without spoiling it. But it's definitely if Boys in the Hood met Gulliver's Travels with a whole lot of Isaac Asimov mixed in, but through the lens of Boots Riley, which if you also haven't seen, sorry to bother you. Check that film out.
And the Book of Clarence, which came out recently. The Book of Clarence, I also, if we're going, okay, I'm glad nobody heard about the Book of Clarence. when it was getting dropped, which I think is a very more fully formed film than the Society for Magical Negroes. But we heard about that because even the trailer for the Society of Magical Negroes caused a conversation in white spaces. So when the Book of Clarence did not, and so even though it's, and that came out in 2023 as well, even though it has a much more layered conversation about the experience, and I think deserves more, a bigger spotlight than the Society of Magical Negroes. Did anybody, like, have you heard about the Books of Clarence? If anybody should have heard about it, it should be the people that are coming to this panel. Right, and that's what we're saying about this whole genre. Like, if anybody should have heard about it, that's a current example of what we're discussing. And I will tell people, go watch the Book of Clarence, and there's so many like interesting little kernels of like, oh, that was super cool, and that was a really, and the performances are great, but people who are interested in the genre still didn't know that it existed. So go home, you should be able to like drop that and stream that now.
Even if you're not interested in the genre, I mean, welcome, thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.
But even if you don't get it, Book of Clarence is like picture Life of Brian. Everyone's familiar with Monty Python, there's a sketch comedy trick from back then. But Life of Brian, but like the SPF requirement's like 25.
It's cool.
Actually, like also like
Netflix, it's on Netflix.
It's on Netflix, yeah.
But like actually, two of this. There's one like the fact that I think it's also still the fact that like anything that is very distinctly like black or Afrofuturistic coded is like this thing like, oh, that's just for black people, and that is a large part of why you don't get the same kind of like, or even things and it's very specific things that involve black people that are marketed to larger audiences because in some way like Magical Negroes will still center white people, therefore it's considered like actually like appropriate for all audiences. The other thing I think that's also kind of what has come up in all this is that one of the things about Afrofuturism and these kind of stories is that they point out that there is more than one type of black person. Mm-hmm. There's more than one type of black or African-based experience going on. And something that like actually was brought up in kind of conversations about some recent like the new Assassin's Creed game and other, but like other just like whenever like a black historical figure comes up, there's a very common like he was very tall and very strong, and highly intelligent, and charismatic, and like all of these different things where you're just describing, oh, you're just describing a superhero, like regardless of what color they are, if they're like almost 7 feet tall, like can do advanced calculus while doing a spin kick and throwing, like that's going to be impressive no matter what, and,
right.
And nothing you can really do to like try to impress an entire group of people is going to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to fight him. Like Yasuke, Makindal, like all these different figures from like history, and it's easy to like kind of center on them because they were just like objectively impressive, but it's also easy to kind of miss that there's so many people who exist, like whatever number of black people who ended up in Japan who weren't super intelligent, who didn't get a chance to meet the shogun, and it's in really good Afrofuturistic works, because even in Black Panther, you get to see a variety of people who have differing opinions on like how they should deal with the outside world. People who are like sometimes who are really charismatic, some of them are kind of jerks, and if you go into the comics too, there's like an entire conversation about people's different experiences that all happen to like share a similar skin complexions, but there is diversity even in that. And I think one of the different things is that when it's done poorly, when you introduce blackness into that traditional sci-fi narrative, usually it's like one kind of version. It's usually either like a really crappy version or the superhuman, better than everyone else, or magical Negro type version, and that's the only real perspective that people ever really get, and you don't really understand that you can actually have like a group and a conversation and variations of opinions, but of course in those cases though, when there's differences in black peoples and differences in opinions, well, all the drama can kind of happen in that community, and then it doesn't really matter what the white people are doing outside of it, which probably is part of why they don't like that.
Right, because it doesn't recenter. And I always think it's interesting, as somebody who comes from a music DJ background, and that's a lot of way of doing, is I like that we can come up with modern terminology to encourage people to look at historical context. And that's a lot of what we get to do when we have a name like Afrofuturism, and what we can do is go, well, here's the artists that we will pull into it as well, and here's the foundational work that got us where we are. So being able to go, well, of course it makes sense that jazz music influences hip hop and all these other things, and being able to make that through line for people and go, oh no, but here's how jazz was created. And jazz was already disruptive when it was created, if you look at it from the Black perspective. And then it was like, oh, now we figured out how to, again, recenter it and put it in another spot. It was just, again, wonderful artists. Wonderful artists. We're just saying that there's more that we can do with it, and here's how it kind of started. And reminding people of that context. And that is what I love. Like, even if we're looking at like the work of our beloved Sounds of Blackness from here in Minnesota, and the work that they've been doing for years, and using music not only to talk about current situations, but to like go through whole historical through lines throughout their albums and what they're able to do with music, but have it sound modern and historic at the same time. That's what I think a lot of what Afrofuturism in general, when we're going, here's the bucket, you know, if you're going, okay, what makes it Afrofuturistic? That's what I think a lot of that bucket is that you clearly go, okay, I feel like I understand the seed that was planted, and now you're showing me like, oh, you thought it was gonna grow into a peach tree, but it's actually a pineapple or a mango, or is there something else that it can be as well, not what you always were expecting?
Yeah, so the diversity of the demographic, the diversity of the community is definitely highlighted, almost like a feature piece of Afrofuturism as a genre. What about diversity of the individual or intersectionality? Does Afrofuturism, and this is a question to y'all, and of course we're at the halfway mark, so definitely open up to the audience if you have comments and questions, but Afrofuturistic pieces, particularly in literature, film, and television, or video games for that matter as well, does it do as good, better, or worse job of highlighting and showcasing intersectionality, whether that be sexual orientations, whether that be like gender expression, whether that be political affiliation?
I don't want to say better, because I don't think that puts a overarching weight on the performer. So I think that there's, like, Janelle Monáe is definitely going to cover all of that intersectionality, because that's what Janelle chooses to do with their art. When somebody else might go, well, I'm focusing on this particular piece of this pie. And I just don't like to encourage us to go, well, an artist, especially when you're in a niche genre, that you have to be all the stuff, and you have to spoke to everything. And so, like, you know, as a performer, I feel like it puts me in this, like, I have to, every time I do a performance, speak for everything. I have to speak on behalf of the queer community, on behalf of the Black community, on behalf of women, on behalf of women over 50 who are perimenopausal. Like, I have to, every time I do a performance, hit all of that. And I'm like, I only got 15 minutes. I can't, you know? So that's the only reason why I go, some, yes, but you still have to give them the license to go, this piece does this.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, because otherwise we go, yeah, but you didn't do all the stuff. And it's like, well, that's the time.
Like, our audience is more receptive when it comes after, because I mean, if you look, Janelle Monáe, you know, she's a product of, easily you can go back to Prince, Sylvester, like, we have a long history, even George Clinton, a long history of like blurring the lines, so to speak, of what expression is in fiction works. Like, we have a myriad, like when looking at Black Panther, like the Dora Milaje, they're queer as it's not quite late. No, they're queer as
today. It's Thursday at 2 p.m. My heavens.
But like the Black Panther films have grossed over $1 billion, whereas like if you mention like a character in a Eurocentric casted film, might be a lady who doesn't like boys, then all of a sudden there's all hell debate. So our audience, or is that just perception? Like, our audience is more receptive coming from us, or is it?
I think, and this is like, I think in general in society we have this whole, there's a certain level of binary approach to things where it's just like, oh, well, if this is white, then it is also cis, it is male oriented, it is straight, it is all these things, and if it is any kind of diversity, it has to be like all the diversity, which is not really how any of that works, because like, I think a really good example of this is in Lovecraft Country, and Atticus his dad, whereas like his dad is minimum bi or very, very gay, but had to like hide that within his own Black community, because that was not something that was going to be tolerated. And Atticus realizing that and being honestly more upset that he was punished for ever showing any kind of like femininity or queerness, more so that other than it being bad itself, I think is a really good example of just kind of like, even within marginalized communities, there is still bias, there's still prejudice. So even if it's something that has been imprinted onto us from an oppressive structure, because like historically, Africa, super queer, super gay, and then so much of that is being kind of like suppressed through colonial practice, but it's still also that prejudice is also now kind of part of the Black experience as well. Like not being able to talk about being gay or queer in Black churches and whatnot is kind of part of that.
Yes.
And I'd say like a good Afrofuturistic story would still qualify without necessarily delving into all the other aspects of intersectionality that might be a part of it. At the same time, I think it's a very common thing that happens. Like when you start questioning one type of ism, the other ones start to come apart as well.
Right.
Whereas like, well, I'm treated poorly for my skin color, even though none of these things are true, and this is all made up, and I'm being abused. Maybe what they say about people who are gay is also incorrect, because they're not right about this. And looking at even like the civil rights movement, how so much of that not only was challenging like questions of race, but also like it did not take very long for like Black parents to go like, you know what? Maybe sexism is bad. Like these are like some of these whole things about freedom and independence. Yeah, I think we should maybe like change some of these policies and like, or it's like maybe like hating on queer people is also bad, or like maybe we should talk about this whole capitalism thing. Like I think because the nature of Afrofuturism is to challenge certain norms around race and culture. It gives it a bit of a wider door to kind of explore other aspects of intersectionality, which comes up I think a lot. But I also don't think it's necessarily there's not necessarily any more motivation to go through that door that regular sci-fi would have, which also again will question norms and whatnot. But I do think from a cultural perspective, because of that whole like, oh, you are one minority, therefore you are all minorities, there's probably a bit of more of an audience acceptance when someone who's already marginalized also brings something else who is a marginalized group, where it's just like, but you're a white lady, why do you like other white ladies? That's so weird.
Yeah, and I don't want to give us so much credit that we're better at it per se. It's just that we're already in this challenged perspective, so bringing up another challenge, it's like, well, I might as well bring that up too, because I'm already here.
Like since we're here.
Yeah. Like even just like knowing like your norms and all these things. Like a friend, one of our humans in the audience sneezed just now, and I went through the lexicon of, well, I don't want to say bless you, and then I said gesundheit, and I'm like, I don't even really know I've ever translated that. It's just a thing that I've heard since I was 4, and so I'm like, well, it's an alternative to saying
it means
God bless you.
It means health.
Health, okay, so I'm glad I said that, because I've never bothered to Google Translate the word. And I think a lot of what we do is reflex. And so being able to have these additional buckets and lenses gives you the idea to dismantle your reflex and really think about, why do you always do the thing that you do? And that's normal. Like, there's a lot of things that we do from reflex, because otherwise, I mean, life is hard enough. If you had to remember how to do some things when your body should just be able to do it. But giving yourself the latitude to go, why do I do that? And is it the right thing to continue to do, or have I just always been doing it because it's comfortable? And so being able to see some of these other, see these films through a different lens, see these series that go and give you a different gaze, hear this music that's talking about something a little different. So it's still talking about a relationship, but it's from a different spin. Or even the creator, it might sound very similar to something you've heard before, but the creator is giving you a different perspective because of who they are and where they were raised. That hopefully goes, oh, well, I have been doing it just because? And why so many of our just because are created from a very narrow focus that does not serve so many human beings that are in our circle. And so this gives you the opportunity to go, oh, I can look at it from a different perspective, and then maybe just give somebody a little bit more time to breathe on some things.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a little bit like you're referencing kind of like the evolution and expansion of culture over time.
Right.
So that brings to a great question of like, we're all people of color of a certain age, like the way you phrase that. So in our time, like what are some of the things that you've noticed changing? So, I mean, big picture, right? W.E. Du Bois, writing in the 30s, was coming from a different perspective than, say, Nnedi Okorafor or Octavia Butler, who's coming from a different perspective as Marlon James or D.C. Edwards. So, but still in that same theme. So
and we rattle names off quickly, like we're all friends. You guys can all hit us up on our socials and we will type out the names to you if you want to, because I always encourage that anytime the three of us are on a panel, we go through stuff fast and we all talk really quick because we just talk about this all the time. So if you're like, okay, I also encourage people that come to these panels, one, thank you very much for being interested in this conversation, and I'm glad that you can ask us. We all volunteer, and there are other people in this room who will volunteer to continue to have these conversations with you and help you go, here's what it is, how do we dismantle it, what's the homework? You know, what are our suggested readings and all of that? Because I encourage you to do that so that you do not go out and interact with whatever random person of the global majority might be in your circle, whatever random queer person, you know, what LGBTQIA+, and then ask them their question, because they may not be volunteering to be in this educational space that we choose to be in. So use the resources that we provide. Don't put the emotional labor on individuals in your circle that may not be the person that wants to educate you on some of this stuff. So I will get off of that particular soapbox.
I mean, for our entertainment, you feel welcome to go up to a random black person.
Would you like to educate me on this? And then you'll send us a message and go, wow, you were right. They did not appreciate me just randomly walking up to them and asking them about, you know, black girl hair culture.
Yes, but we like,
Dear diary, today was not as productive as I was hoping.
Someone snapped on me at the bus stop. I don't understand why.
That's what pepper spray smells like. But in the evolution, like, so we're all, we remember the Clinton administration, the first Bush, Reagan, Carter-ish. We've all been around long enough that we've seen some changes. So what are some of the changes that we've seen?
I do appreciate that it's less of a, I love being in nerd spaces because it's less of a Highlander mentality. You know, is what I feel in my personal journey, is that I'm allowed to be on a panel with multiple people that either designate as I do, that seem to say, that have a more similar lens, that have a more similar skin tone than it used to be. When I was younger, I remember people telling me, oh, you like sports? All your friends must be men. Or you like comic books? All your friends must be men. Oh, you're this, oh, you must like hang out with white people, you must, all these things, all these I have tos, instead of going, oh, I found other female or female presenting friends that also liked comic books. You know, it was a very Highlander mentality where I was the only me, and I was supposed to be that one, and I was the one that was in the club, and then everybody else in the club was whatever the prevailing culture was. And I do feel like it really has broadened, because look at the wonderful diversity we have in this room and how this con has changed over the years. You know, I've told this story before. When I first moved to Minnesota, and it was before CONvergence existed, and there was a thing called Misfits, and I ended up calling my friend going, I've never felt gatekept as aggressively as I did when I first came here. And that's growing up in Phoenix, Arizona. Like, I was the nerd that was in ROTC, and like, we dressed up in Star Trek universe and marched in a parking lot. And then I got here and they're like, name all the Doctor Who actors that you can't stay at our club. Like, well, first of all, that's a dumb, easy question. But the fact that I even have to do it just to show up, because I don't present geek in the way that you're expecting geek to be presented, has evolved and changed within my particular geek lifetime, and I love that. So
I enjoy that you used the reference of like Highlander and like being the only one, because I remember early on in the days of going to cons, I'd be walking through a hallway and then I would like spot or even like sense another black person, and it was like, another one of us is here, and you would like, and it was like, and it felt like Queen's playing plays. They're running just like, here we are. So much running, like hug each other and talk about like, oh my gosh, you watch this too. Like, it was something that was just very rare to see. Almost any kind of like diversity going to events, going to and a very large part of like even kind of like me really kind of learning more about African history, culture, kind of came out when I started to learn that like it wasn't weird to be black and like math because, oh, like kind of like, look at all of these like historic black mathematicians and science, all like, and like, or like, it was even a bit of a weird moment when I was like, I'm just so unique. I'm a black guy who likes science and martial arts and things like, oh wait, no, that's like just like the entire continent.
Right.
This has been like a thing for like, I'm actually not that unique at all. But it's something that I've noticed that changes, like, is being able to actually see what people are actually having, and like, these are also more, and like having more conversations, but also I think the biggest change that I have kind of noticed in terms of like media is the shifting from the tokenism, the distracting tokenism. Because I remember being as a kid watching things. It's like, oh, well, there are these 5 shows, and then there's like these 5 like comedies I'm watching, and then there's Family Matters. Okay, there's some representation there. That's good enough. Or like the occasional one black character who would show up in a show, in a sci-fi show or a fantasy show, and it's like, oh yes, yeah, we're represented. This is totally fine. And then starting to realize how much that was very much how much of the '90s was almost kind of like a bit of a distraction of like, look, see, we're incorporating people and there's diversity and it's fine and everything, and we've solved racism. Let's move on now. And kind of really seeing how much that was a bit of a distraction tactic and how that is becoming less so. And there's still the attempt to try to like, let's put some like black people in like in a cool like medieval or royal British show or whatnot, and then like, yeah, it's fine, we're good, we've all fixed it, kind of thing. But I think it's much harder, and it's much harder to like even do those types of stories without giving a lot more context as to how the black people got there in the first place even, or like how long they've actually been there, and just things like that. And I really appreciate just kind of just seeing that aspect of just like being able to go to more nerd spaces, and there's like more people who look like me and more people who look different from everyone else that including me, but also just like it's harder to just like do lip service to diversity in stories, I feel like.
Agreed. I also think that it's, as far as casting, I do like that there is more, we'll call it diverse casting. I don't like to call it that because there's so many people who are mad that are doing, but there are more properties that if it doesn't matter what the character is organically diverse. And so you'll see a cast that has a little bit of everything in a good way. Like I'm only 2 episodes in. They just dropped on Amazon, on Prime Video, My Lady Jane, and I really enjoyed the first 2 episodes of My Lady Jane. I did not read the books, so if anybody read the books, I would love to hear what you think, because My Lady Jane, it was this Jane series, and these wonderful authors wrote these series. So there's one about Jane Eyre, there's one about Calamity Jane, and then this one is about my brain just stopped.
Jane Fonda?
No, not Jane Fonda. Jean Grey. There we go. Yeah. So, and how they end up being queen and all this stuff. So it's a retelling. It's not at all historical in nature. It's kind of just some pieces that are picked up. Where it's like, well, what if we did the story this way? But watching the series, and again, I'm only two episodes into. I think it's like 8 or something like that. But there is diversity because it doesn't matter. They're all talking around with these fake Britishy accents, and the reason why I'm curious is I didn't read the books, and I know that they were young adult fiction. This is pretty adult, and so to me it felt like they know that from when these things were written in 2014, that all of us are now older, so they're like, well, put the sex in, because now they're all adulting, is what I felt like. They're like, it's kind of Bridgerton with jokes and bodice ripping. So, but I do it was just, oh, that character's black. And it just cuts, and that I did like about it, because yeah, I noticed, but it didn't matter. And I think there's more, and Taylor, you've mentioned this before, that there needs to be enough characters, and what really counts as inclusivity is that there's enough characters that the characters can be pivotal or not, regardless of what it is.
And well, piggybacking off that, one of the things I love about diverse casting especially now or more often, is that they're getting into diversity of like looks, whether that's physical appearance or body types. Because you go back to like another Netflix series, Orange is the New Black, all of a sudden it's like, hey, every non-male actor isn't a size 2. We have all kinds of looks. Because Bridgerton, we love Bridgerton, but that's cheating. Because if you don't like Regé-Jean Page, it's because you're blind. Like, that's not even a human. Gorgeosity made flesh. But
I do think I do really appreciate that he can talk about race in a very blunt way and get away with it because he's him and he's pretty when he says it and he has a great voice. And I feel like it's like and it's very disarming and slightly encouraging and discouraging at the same time that people are more willing to listen to it because it's such a pretty package. It's going, yeah, you need to dismantle your racism and systemic tactics. And it's because it's like, yeah, but it's the Bridgerton dude, so okay. So they're still not gonna listen, but they're not burning down his house.
Well, actually, another example of the diverse casting I thought was interesting was in Titans, and when they made Starfire, and like the Tamarians did, just very, very black, both in like the look, even like some of the ways that like Tamarian language kind of like flowed to it, or also they made Tim Drake a Hispanic in that, or it's just like in the comics she's kind of orange. And it's like, we don't necessarily, like, we can really kind of cast it however we want in this show, and it's also, it's its own universe, so like, why not? And it was just like, I think about that actually a lot, and I'm hoping that's something that gets addressed more in particularly live action adaptations of anime, because there is mukoseki is the term, but it's statelessness. It's the idea that part of what made anime so appealing and global appeal is like, these are characters that are often like set in maybe like in Japan or an East Asian setting, but have features that were based a lot off of like Disney art, and that is much more westernized. So they didn't really have, it's referred to as being stateless, where they don't really have a particular like ethnic or cultural grounding. They can just kind of be assumed anywhere, and depending on like what range of coloration they would give the characters, you have that kind of quality. Generally though, I would say that it tends to be more like, it appeals to Japan because it's made in Japan, and it appeals to white people because they look kind of white. It's kind of where that kind of leans to, but technically, in so many different stories, the actual ethnicity of these characters is never really clear, or it is a made-up ethnicity. You can really, there are a whole anime series that you could pretty much do as like entirely black characters, and that would not change it, probably even like fit with how some of the characters are even described. And I'm kind of hoping that since live action adaptations are becoming a lot more popular, that's going to be something that kind of like, we have the option to make these characters whatever real person ethnicity that we really want. Why not vary it up a little bit?
Well, we're down to our last handful of minutes, so I'd love to open it up to the audience. I see a hand over here.
Hi. So, Lathan, you mentioned Tomi Adeyemi earlier, and it was speaking of the topic of diversity. I wonder if you had any commentary on diversity in literature, and because I've noticed in a lot of books I've read that when they introduce a new character, if that character is white, they don't say anything, but they only say something if that character is Asian or black, and they describe them, like their chocolate skin or their olive colored or whatever.
Smelled of cocoa butters. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Smelled of cocoa shells. I'm like, I do. But
yeah, that is, and I think description is really, I think, important. Actually, Marlon James' Black Leopard, Red Wolf, I think is really good about this, because most of it is set in a fictional version of East Central Africa. But he goes into a lot of detail to describe that there are different peoples. Like there are very clearly more lighter Middle Eastern people that are parts of the land. There are people who are very, very dark, like almost pitch black dark. There's like various forms of brown, and using things like landscape, he uses a lot of just like environmental description. He actually usually told from the perspective of the main character, Tracker. So Tracker kind of using whatever color or environmental references to describe different peoples. And I do like that, because it's more or less like it avoids trying to like get into like identifying, because they'll say where the people are from, but kind of trying to identify any kind of specific like group, but kind of just like, oh, this is just how they look. These are the things that I reference and I know, and I think that's a very important thing in terms of like how to do that well. Because I think the book does a very good job of kind of illustrating that there's a lot of diversity in this one region of this magical continent that is, I don't think was named yet. I've only gone through the first book. The second book is so long. And there's like so many emotions in that book.
Cool.
It's just.
I have
Here's a
list like
follow-up
that
too. Here's a follow-up to Red Leopard White.
I have a list like that too, where I'm just like, I want to do it, and I just have not had the time to get through all of the things. I'm like, I have a stack too. I'm like, I'm gonna read that, or I'm gonna play that. Like, there's a series of video games. Back when we were talking about that I'm like, I want to play them. I don't have time to play them. So I have a friend who's a TikTok and a Twitch streamer. So I was like, 8-bit, I will buy this game because I want to see it, and I know I don't have time to play it. So I'm like, will you play it? And then I can just watch you play it. So I'm not above that. I'm like, I will buy the game as your Patreon just to see it.
I do want to throw out Colson Whitehead. I mean, he has a lot of novels, but two in particular, The Intuitionist, which is hardcore. It's heavier on the sci-fi part of the Afrofuturism sci-fi, but it's about this future situation where they have these giant space elevators, and it's about the folks that work repairing them and all the stuff ensues. And probably his more popular work is a book called Underground Railroad, which I do think they tried to do an adaptation of it not too long ago.
Yeah.
It was like, from what I recall, like many adaptations, the book was better. But if you come across either, but Colson Whitehead's work is all, and then DC Edwards, who's a local author. Bright City is just, it's her only novel, it's driving us nuts. She's like George Forster, because it's such a great epic space opera, like Dune without the problematic aspects.
And I think somebody on this panel has completed a variety.
Sorry, DC Edwards.
No, but no. And what are your Afrofuturistic books that we have?
Oh, quite a few.
Yes.
But to find that out, you have to come see me later at Con, because we're almost at time.
Oh, gotcha.
Yes.
All right.
And I can't tell you what you should read. You should read all the stuff by Tier.
I will. You should read all the stuff by Tier. Yes, our friend with the blue.
Maybe Sharon Cisco should say when he'll be.
Oh.
Yeah, we have 2 minutes, so go ahead and look at it. When are you doing your thingy?
There's one later, and then one later.
How do you have that work out?
Time to open this. You know what's funny is that so many of our friends, because they are, or so many of my friends are authors and people that create wares, and I'm one of those few comedian performers that had never gotten around to like making merch. And so I finally made merch, and so this is what I have. If you come and see me at any of my meet and greets, you can have one until I run out. Back to being like, did I show this to you too? Okay, so I like a play on words, and so if you come and see me at my meet and greets, I have 2 this year, and I can tell you about it. I have made these. As a lady of a certain age, I always need a fan, and so I thought it would be funny to be, okay, it says I'm a fan, which it is. But also so that you have the ability to be not only a fan of like me and us and anybody you see here and whatever thing that you love, but you can look at it yourself and give yourself that personal affirmation that you need to be a fan of yourself as well. So you are a fan. So if you come see me, I will give these out until I run out of them, and kind of thing. And so that's what I have. So maybe, that I clearly am not a graphic designer as well, but I thought they were cute. So.
I mean, we are at time, so where can we find everyone? I have found it, I can answer that.
You go first.
Oh, okay. So I will be I'm on 16 panels this year, so you'll probably see me around.
Yeah, so it's tiny print.
If you want to find, like, specifically with regards to Afrofuturism works, I'll be doing a reading tomorrow at 5, and then I have a meet and greet on Saturday at 3:30. I'll be reading from my works.
Nice. Well, I'm going to be, I am the MC again, the Mistress of Ceremonies this evening for our opening ceremony, so you can see me on main stage at 7 o'clock. My meet and greet is tomorrow at 5, and then Saturday at 2. But one of the things that I'm doing here, and I'm on a bunch of panels, so you can see that, but 2 of the things that I'm most proud of, along with a lot of the performance panels, is that I'm doing a CONvergence edition of Miss Shannon's Comedy Through the Chaos. It's a web series that I launched in 2020, and we've been doing a residency over at Crooner's Supper Club, so you can see us, if you can't make it to our show, Friday night at 8:30 on main stage. 3 of my favorite performers are coming in as well, and the thing we do with comedy comedy through the chaos is we have a different chaos of the moment every edition that we focus on, and I am very specific that it's the chaos of the moment because we don't want to stay in any of these chaotic situations. So we are doing the chaos of identity. And so my friend Will Spotted Bear is joining us, Matt Doema is joining us, and so is the wonderful and talented Sarah McPeck. So we'll be doing that on main stage Friday night at 8:30. And then I'm also going to be part of a really cool panel called Beyond the Barrier. So we'll be having a similar conversation that we're having here and talking about representations, and that's Sunday at 2:30.
Well, actually, if you want to hear more of me digging into like the problems with classical science fiction, we're going to be talking at 7. I'm going to be on the eugenics in science fiction panel, which I believe is going to be largely of like, this is a very popular trope. Maybe needs a bit of a different approach. And just talking about that in general, I will also be in the manufactured ST stigma panel that's going to be at 8:30 and open to it. We're talking about polyamory later tonight. Tomorrow, for more like Afrofuturism things, I will be on the Octavia Butler fan panel.
Love that.
At 9 a.m. I'll also be in the Wachowskis and their Impact panel. I will be geeking out a lot about Speed Racer in that one. Right now, that's going to be like my big thing there. And then in terms of storytelling, not in front of the children's. So like, what kind of things should children be kind of exposed in terms of like media, in terms of like adult topics and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I'll also be like Saturday. There'll be like a superhero fatigue, and it's not about you. So stories that that are outside of like your personal experience.